Hi. Previously, we looked at Google Sheets and we looked at some basic functions and how they worked, how you established formulas, etc. Today, we're going to revisit that. We're going to add in some more formulas and take a look at how to use them in maybe somewhat more complex way. Okay, to start with, we have a simple data set. These are used cars. So the first column is the make of the car, the model of the car, the year of the car, the current mileage, and the asking price. Okay, this is a rather short data set. I only have 25 records, the header row, and 25 examples. But if you can acquire some kind of data like this on the internet, it's not too hard. It can be a great activity with a lot of data because there's a lot more information to tease out. You can ask all sorts of questions in the end. Does the model affect price, which we assume that it might as adults? How much of an effect does the year have? Maybe how much effect does the mileage have? Okay, so really can make this into an exploratory activity for students, especially those of a high school age. You can do similar types of activities with younger students. You might just choose a different data set and one that they can maybe relate to more easily. Okay, to start with, we're going to look at a couple of toolbar options to help you just get a feel for the data to start with. Okay, so I am going to come in here and I am going to click somewhere in the year column, and I am going to say data, sort, and see it says column C there? So we're going to sort column C. A to Z means alphabetically in order. Z to A would mean reverse alphabetically. So if I do that, notice what happens is it includes that header row in there. And we kind of don't want that. Okay, so instead of doing that, a better thing to do would be to select the data you want to sort, and you don't have to get the exact number. You can select the whole columns. And then when you go into this sort range option is going to be live and active. So if you don't do a selection, then you can't really use this. But if you do select the columns, you can use this tool, and this one's a lot more powerful. Now, fair warning, when you select the range, you want to select all your data. If you select partial data, if I were just to select, say, the make and the model, and I were to sort it, it would get out of alignment with the associated information in the additional columns. Okay, so it would put these in alphabetical order, but it wouldn't move columns C, D, and E. So what you want to do is get all the data that you want sorted so it stays, the correct information stays associated. And then you're going to say data, sort range, advanced range sorting options. Okay, first thing to do is to pick data has header row, if in fact you have a header row. Okay, so that means this is not going to be included in the sort. Next, you get to choose what it's going to be sorted by. So I am going to sort it first by year, and I have the option of A to Z, which would mean smallest to largest, or largest to smallest. So if I wanted the most recent, I would do this. If I wanted the oldest, I would do this. Now, the nice thing about this feature is we often want to sort by more than one column. And what that means is that the first column that's listed here is how it will sort. But you can see that we have multiples of years. We have 2020, 2020, 2020. So all the 2020s will come first, but within that group of 2020s, do we want to sort that group by another field? So I'm going to say yes, and I am going to sort within that group. I am going to sort by make, and then I'm going to add one more field, and I'm going to sort by model. Okay, so if I have a whole bunch of Toyotas, they will come together, but then even within the Toyotas, they will sort by the model name. And I could add additional columns. I could then say sort by lowest mileage, or sort by lowest or highest asking price, or I can put as many of these as I want. So I just say sort, and you can now see my 2016s are grouped, my 17s and 18s, and then within these 2016s, you can see that it goes in alphabetical order: Audi, Chrysler, Jeep, Mercedes. And then seeing that this is not, this returns to a lower place in the alphabet, that's because we're now in the 2017 group. Okay, so that's how sorting works. Can be a really handy way to move data around and just get a feel for it. Okay, the next toolbar option that we're going to use is something called filter. And you're going to find that in the toolbar itself. It's this little funnel. And when I click on that, you'll notice you get these little lines of descending length, okay, like a little inverted triangle. And that means that the sorting is on. And now if I wanted to, I could come in here and it lists every unique value in that column. And there's a couple of ways to use sort. We're going to use it very simply today. I think we'll come back and we'll revisit some of the other options later. But to start with, I can say I want to see, I can uncheck these boxes and just leave 2017. Oop, look at that. I must have left 2020 on as well. And now I'm just looking at the 2017s. Okay, so a good practice often is to sort the data in a way that makes sense for you. And then you can start to filter to get a more focused look at certain groups of data. Now, I'm going to hit the plus sign down here to create a new tab, Sheet 3. And just so you know, if you wanted to save this information separately, if you just wanted to look at this and it was worth preserving by itself, you could simply select it, copy it, and when you go to paste this data, you want to paste special and values only. Otherwise, it's if you have formulas in there, it's going to try to paste those formulas, and that doesn't always make sense. Okay, so sometimes you could, but in most cases, you're going to do values only, and then these are just hard values. Okay, I can take the filter off at any point by simply clicking on it and saying select all. By the way, if we have a lot of different unique options, there's a little scroll bar here. If we have a lot of different unique options in the data set, we may not want to go through and unclick or click them individually, so these two buttons are extremely useful. I can clear it, and then I can say I want 17 and 18. Okay, now they're only in the correct order now because I had previously sorted them. If I had not sorted them, they may have wound up being random. So I think you get the idea. When you're done with a filter, you can just say select all. Note that when a filter is on, that icon changes from the inverted triangle to what looks like a funnel. Okay, so you've got to be careful with that. When you've got a big data set, you can turn a filter on, forget that it's on, and think that you're working with a full set, and you're really not. Okay, the other way, if you want to take filters off altogether, just come up to the toolbar, click that, and that's just a toggle to turn them on and then off again. Now, there are formulas that will do the same thing for you. Very often, it's just easier to use those toolbar options, but I'll give you a quick overview of the formula. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so that you can see, and we'll use a real small subset of this data. So we're going to click in an empty cell, hit the equal sign, which we know means that we're about to use a formula. This particular formula is called sort, and if I type that in and I hit the open parenthesis, it gives me this nice pop-up with instructions. Range is highlighted. That means I'm in the position where I should be defining the range. And my range is going to be from cell A2 through, well, let's say A13. So 12 rows worth of data. Okay, I selected everything. I didn't have to. I could have stopped at year or mileage, but I've done the entire number of columns. And now when I'm ready for the next feature, all I need is a comma. Very often in formulas, most often in fact, the different parameters are separated by commas. So now it's asking for a sort column. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. What I would like to do is I would like to sort it by the 5th column. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about the name. I'm going to sort it by asking price. That's the comma. That's the value that goes in there. And then you can see if I hit another comma, it's going to jump me to is ascending. And the correct value for this is either true or false. If it's true, it's going to be alphabetic from smallest to greatest. If it's false, it's going to be reversed. Let's take a look. If I simply hit the enter key at this point, you can see, let me scroll over a little bit, that we now have the least expensive car working up to the most expensive car of the set I selected. Okay, if I edit that to say false, it reverses the order. Now, it's not going to make so much sense because we don't have any duplicate values here. But know that if you did, if I click in here, notice there are these brackets. When you see brackets, these are optional additional information. Okay, so these three are required because they're not in brackets. But everything in brackets may be added if you want to. And basically, look, it's adding a sort column 2. And then it's going to want this is ascending or descending. So basically, if I wanted to, let me sort by, do we have any duplicate data in this little set at all? And the answer is Toyota, Hyundai, Ford. No. Yes, we do. We have the dates. Okay, so they're in column 3. So instead, let's sort by column 3. We'll make that true. That's going to get from earliest year to latest year. And then within those sets, I could give a second sort. And I'm going to say my second sort is going to be column number 1, the make of the vehicle. You know what? Let's do something a little more interesting. Let's make it the mileage. So I'm going to go with column 4, and I'm going to make that true as well. And now you can see that all the 2016s are in here, and now they're from least mileage to greatest mileage. 2017s follow the same pattern. 2018s follow the same pattern as well. If I wanted to, I could simply have made this, instead of defining a range, you can always put no number on these. So this is column A to E. That means all the way down. So now I've got the complete set of data here. It goes one row below our data because I started one row below here. Okay, so I get everything from A to E. The only issue with that is going to be that, again, it picked up this header line that we really don't want. Okay, enough of that. I'm going to delete that formula. Notice that this the formula only exists in this one cell, so all this data is being presented, but there's really all I have to do is delete the cell with the formula in it and everything is gone. The other function that I like that works like this is equals unique. And this is great. This is a great function. All I have to do here is define the range that I want to include. So I'm just going to take everything under the category of make. And then that's all there is to it. I'm going to close the parenthesis, hit enter. And this is showing me the unique makes represented in this list. So this particular list was 5,000 long. It would just pick out, and there were, 20 Chryslers, and there were 30 Toyotas, and there were 100 Jeeps. It would just pick out the names of the makes and get you that nice list. So one thing you can do with that is you can copy it from the formula, and now if I paste it as values only, I've got this list to use in other ways. Okay, so sometimes you can use it directly from the formula, but often you're just going to do that as a quick way to get what you need and then copy it out. Okay, now we're going to very briefly look at comparison operators and logicals. Comparison operators are just what we're used to in math. Greater than, less than, equal to. Things like that. Greater than or equal to. And the way you can basically do that is, as a formula, is just to say equals. Let's just say this price is greater than this price. and it returns false. So that means that E2 is not really greater than E5. If we had done it just the opposite, if we said E2 is less than E5, it would have come back as true. Now the equal sign works just as you'd expect it to. We can say that the first equal sign is to tell you that you're making a formula. So if E2 is equal to E3, and the answer is false, they are not the same. Okay, let's take a look now. I'm going to slide this over a little bit. At something called logicals. And the three logicals that we're going to look at are AND, OR, and NOT. So we want to think for certain parameters. I only want to consider a vehicle if it's under a certain price point and if it's under a certain mileage. So let's take a look at that now. I can say equals, and when you're using an AND condition, you start with that, A and D, and a set of parentheses, and in here you put as many conditions as you would like. So I am going to say that I'm going to click on this cell because this is where the mileage is. And remember, I'm not just doing it for this cell. I'm going to copy it down and I'm going to do it for all my cells, which in this case is not so many, but you know, I could have 2,000 rows here or 10,000 rows for that matter. Okay, so D2 has to be less than 60,000 miles for me to consider it. That's the first condition. Now I'm going to put a comma, and I'm going to say that the asking price, or E2, has to be less than $25,000. If both of those conditions are true, then it should return true. In this case it is. This is less than 60 and it's less than 25. If I simply copy that formula down, and I can do that by clicking on it, grabbing this little handle and stretching it down, you're going to see there are a series of trues and falses. Okay, this one is underneath the price, but it's not underneath the mileage, and therefore, since these are AND conditions, since both have to be true, it comes back false. We're not limited to two. I could simply put another comma and I can put another condition. So I could have 3, 4, 5, 6 conditions, and all of those would need to be true. Even one that was not true would return a false. Now, why is this useful? Let's take a look. So now I have this list. Anything true is what I want to consider. So going back to what we've done before, if I turn my filters on, I can simply look at my trues, and those are the cars that I'm considering. Okay, let's look at an OR statement and how that works. I'm going to just overwrite, well, I'll come to the next cell here. I'm going to say equals, and it works the same way, or open a parentheses, and one of two things must be true. Either, I'm going to click on the cell for mileage, either the mileage is less than 60,000, let's make it a little lower this time. The mileage is less than 40,000, comma, or the asking price is less than 20,000. Okay, so I'm looking for a car that either has low mileage or is inexpensive. And that returns false because neither of those conditions is true. But you see, if I copy down my formula, and another way to copy it down is simply to take this handle and double click it. Okay, I'll just call this consider to. And now I could simply, now notice when I made a new column, the filters weren't automatically added. So what I'm going to do instead, after I format that, is I'm going to click off the filter, on the filter, and now it has that. So in this case, all of those vehicles meet one of those criteria. And again, we're not limited to 2. I could put 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then if any one of those conditions was met, it would return true. We're not going to go into an example here, but know that you can use a combination of and or in a single equation. Okay, so this and this or that. Okay, it just really has it's a matter of how you set up your formula, how you place your parentheses, etc. Okay, the last logical is something called not. And not just kind of reverses whatever the formula is. So let's take a look at that. First thing I want to remember to do is to take off the filter, because otherwise I'm not going to be copying that formula into all of my cells. Potentially some of them are hidden. So what I want to do is I want to say equals, because that's my formula, not, and I am looking for cars that do not exceed 70,000 miles. That's my absolute limit. Okay, so not, here's a mileage cell, D2, it's not greater than or equal to 70,000. And that's true. It's not equal to greater than or greater than or equal to 70,000. And as I copy it down, you can see that this one is over 70, so that's false. This one is over 70, so that's false. So my formula is working correctly here. Okay, now we can even make this example a little more flexible and a little more powerful. So I'm going to slide over here, and I'm going to come into cell K1, and I'm just going to type mileage, and next to it I'm going to put my 70,000. Okay, so this 70,000 is actually the number I want to use in this formula. So instead of typing it in, I can simply reference that cell. So I can say D2 is greater than or equal to, in this case it's a not formula, L1. And that's going to substitute that 70,000 into this formula. So this is exactly the same formula I had a second ago. Now, I could copy this down, but I'm going to run into a little problem here. Oh, look, it's actually making a suggestion for me. It's figured out that what I don't want to have happen is when I go to cell D3, I don't want it to reference cell L3. I want all of these formulas to reference L1 no matter how far down we go. I'm going to cancel that for a second. And the way that we do that is we make this something called an absolute reference. An absolute reference means that it won't increment either row-wise or column-wise. And I can actually make part of it absolute. I can make the row not increment or the column not increment or both. Quickest way to do that is to click on the cell value once it's in the formula and hit the F4 key. And you can see it puts a $ in front of the L and a $ in front of the 1. That means that this is a fully absolute formula. If I copy this formula to the right, it will still reference cell 1. If I copy this formula down, it will still reference cell 1. Now, while I'm there, if I continue to hit F4, you can see it's going to toggle through different options. Here, it's locking in the row number, but not the column. If I hit F4 again, now it's locking in the column, but not the row. And if I hit it again, it's locking in nothing because there's no $. Hit it again, it goes back to that absolute reference. So this is something that you kind of learn with practice. It's easy to mess up a formula by not locking in references to certain cells. Sometimes we want those references to be flexible and to increment, and sometimes we don't. Okay, so there's my formula. I am now going to copy that down. Do this here. And now, even if I click on the bottom formula, you can say, even though it's comparing D26 over here out of view, it is still comparing that to L1. And the nice thing about this is I can come in here at any time and change this value. Okay, so I'm going to say 50,000 miles, and they will update. See, a lot more went false because there are a number of cars that have mileage between 50 and 70. I can put it up to 100 and almost everything is going to turn true. I think there's only one car that has mileage over 100,000 miles. Or I could put it 20,000 miles, and you can see that in this case there's only one or two cars. Easiest way to tell is probably in this case by a filter. There's only 3 cases. If I slide over, I can see each of those cars has less than 20,000 miles. Okay, the last set of functions we're going to look at are called if functions, or ifs, plural functions. Okay, the ifs with an S are the kind of, I don't know, second generation or the newer functions, and they just give you more options than the original. I would recommend just using them exclusively. We'll take a quick look at the difference and go from there. So let me remove my filter so I get all my data back. I am going to insert a couple of columns in here so that this data can still be in use and we have a little more room to work here. Okay, the first statement is an if statement. Okay, so that's the simplest form of this. And you say equals if, and you give it a condition. So let's take these 3 columns and just kind of make them narrow. Get them out of the way for the moment so we can see a little more data. Okay, here we go. So I can say if this year is greater than or equal to 2020, that's my condition. I'm going to put a comma, and I'm going to now give it a value that I want it to return. So up until now we've been seeing true and false. But using an if statement, we don't have to return true and false. We can return whatever we want. So if C2 is greater than or equal to 2020, I'm going to put this in quotes, because if it's text, it has to be in between quotes. I'm going to put newest year. Then I'm going to put a comma, and in parentheses I'm going to put older model, close parentheses. I'm sorry, close quote, close parentheses. So there's 3 parts to this if statement. The first one is the condition you're testing. The second one is the value to return if the condition is true. Okay, so if this actually is greater than or equal to 2020, and our data set includes only things up to 2020, it'll return newest year, and then if not, it will return older model. Okay, so let's hit enter and see what happens. Oh, it identifies 2016, this car, as an older model. If I copy down my formula, you'll notice everything comes back as older model until I hit 2020, and then it returns newest year. Now, not to get too complicated, but what we can do with these if statements is we can take this second value, this value that's returned if things are false, and if we're clever, we can use it to test another if statement. So I can substitute in there. As a matter of fact, let's do it this way. Let's do it as a separate formula. We're going to say if this year is greater than, let's say, or equal to 2018. Now what do we want to return? And I'll just get two sets of quotes in there to get it out of the way. So if it's greater than or equal to 2018, we're going to put in somewhat older. And then in this final place, we'll put in older model. Okay, now if we copy that formula down, notice that the somewhat older kicks in when we hit 2018 because that's what we told it to do, greater than or equal to 2018. Unfortunately, what it's doing is it's also identifying these 2020s as somewhat older, and we'll look at how to fix that in a minute. And now we're going to say, that's all we really need here, actually. So, this first formula, what we can do, I'm going to click here, and I'm actually going to copy this formula, not the equal sign, but everything else. So I copied it, it's on my clipboard. Let's get it again. Copy it. And then I'm going to hit the escape key because I don't want this to increment. It's copied, but if I just copy and paste it, it's going to try to change this reference. So I hit the escape key, and I come into older model, and now instead of older model here, which identifies everything that's not 2020 or newer as older, I'm going to drop that whole if statement inside there. So basically what it does is if it's 2020 or newer, it says newest year. If not, it checks to see if it's greater than 2018. Now remember, anything that was 2020 was already flagged, and if that happens, this second test never happens. But if it fails, the second test happens, and if the second test proves true, if it's 2018 or newer, it becomes somewhat older, and only if it fails this test does it become truly older. Let's see how that works. Well, it didn't change anything on the first one. Well, that's because it's 2016. But if I copy it down, you can see that now it has classified everything that's 2016 and 17 is older, everything is 18 and 19 as somewhat older, and everything is 2020 as newest. So I don't really need this formula, although this was a useful way, especially in the beginning, especially when you're not comfortable with the formulas. Sometimes you can build them out in steps and then combine them, to get the result that you want here. Okay, now with an if formula such as that, you can actually use up to 7 of them. So I could take this older model out of here and I could put another formula in there and another formula and another formula up to 7. So that's one way of handling it, nesting. It's called nesting when you put one formula inside another, of nesting if statements inside each other. Okay. Okay, there's another kind of if function called countif, and it works very, very similar. There's a countif, a sum if, an average if, and a max if and a min if. And they all come in versions of if and ifs. So we're going to look at one of those now, or maybe two, and know that they all work exactly the same way. So in order to do this, I'm going to put my model years here. I'm going to say 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Okay, I'm going to use these as a reference. We're going to use them very much in the same way that we use this mileage. We're going to pass them into the formula just because it's a little more convenient to do so. You could hard code that. You could write those numbers in your formulas, but we're just going to do it a little quicker. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to say total count. So equals count if. I'm going to select this entire column. Doesn't matter that it exceeds, the bottom. I'm going to select that entire column for year. And then in this formula, the first thing you select is the range, the thing that you want to check. And the second thing you select is the criteria that you want to check it against. Okay, well, I want to check this against 2016. So if I just click in that cell, that value will feed in over here. So this is saying count it. Let's get a count of everything in column C that has a year of 2016. And there's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if I click on that cell and copy it down, one cell too many. Since I did not make this an absolute reference, notice when I go to the same cell, it's now L3 because I copied it. It's now L4. So what it's doing is it's counting if the year is 2017. This row is counting if L4. It's 2018, 2019, 2020. So a very quick way to get a count of how many vehicles are in each year. Okay, there are a series of other functions that work exactly the same way. This is countif. It counts up the number of instances. There's sumif, which would add all the values together. It doesn't really make sense here for us to add together the asking prices or the total mileage. There's averageif, so we can use that as an example. There's maxif, find the maximum if certain conditions exist, and of course minif. So let's run it through one more time really quickly here with average. So this way we'll be able to find the average value of 2016 vehicles, 2017, 2018. So equals average if. It's asking for a criteria range, so we're going to say the year. Is equal to 2016. And now there's a third value you can put in here. So it's asking you for the criteria range, what to check. You're going to check the year column and see if it matches 2016. So those are the first two. The third is what to average. And in this case, I'm just going to pick E because that's where the prices are. So if this car was 2016, then do an average of all the 2016s. And let's just very quickly make that into currency. And the average of 2016 is a little over $18,000. Where if I pull that down, $21,000 for the next year, about $500 more for 2018. Quite a bit more for 2019. And then less for 2020. So this is a great question for students to ask why it would decrease here. And the answer, of course, is I didn't limit the model. So we may have higher price models in here, even though, some of them are older, some of them are newer, etc. Okay. Now, this is the countif function and the averageif function. As I said, sumif if you want to use it, at maxif, minif. There are also versions of these like countifs, plural with an S. And all that does, let's do that right down here. I'm going to paste these down here. I'm going to take my same headers and paste them over here. And we're going to start with a very similar formula, countifs. Okay, and a criteria range, so we're going to say, same as we did before, if the year, which is in C, is equal to 2016. But now it's going to let us put in a second, and if we want a third, fourth, fifth, criteria to test against. So what I'm going to do here is something a little more complicated. I'm going to put another comma. And you can see that the way these are set up is they follow a pattern. There's the criteria range, and then what you're checking it against. And you simply repeat that pattern. You put another comma, you put a second criterion range, and a second value to check it against, a third one if you want, fourth one if you want, etc. So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say an if the mileage, and here's where it gets just a little bit tricky. We could say, let's make it not tricky to start with. Let's say the mileage is less than 60,000. And we're going to have to, because there's a greater than or less than sign in there, we're going to have to put that in quotes. Okay, a couple little tricks you have to know. So you're going to wind up putting that in quotes here. And now if I copy that down, it's going to check all the models. And you can see while there are 7 2020 models, only 5 of them meet both criteria. So that means that 2 of them must be over 60,000 miles, or they wouldn't have been dropped from the list. Whereas none of the 2019s, I can see that here there's 5 of them altogether, and 5 of them down here means none of them exceeded the 60,000 miles. Okay, now you may be asking, previously we fed in that value from another cell. Can we do that? And the answer is yes, of course you can do that. It's just, the syntax is just a little particular. Okay, so if you're going to feed in a cell, what you need to do is you need to, and by the way, this could be greater than an or equal to, that would be fine. You're going to put the comparison operators into quotes, not the number. And then you're going to add the reference to the cell, and you're going to do that. Remember that concatenate function that we looked at previously? The end, you're going to use that, and you're going to concatenate the cell to it. So now it's saying greater than or equal to what's ever in that cell. Let me copy that down. Nothing should change because basically we're just feeding. Whoop. Oh, I see why it changed. It changed because, let's take a look here. This is looking at R1, and when I copied it down, this row is looking at R2. Okay, so while this reference, the L9, doesn't need to be an absolute reference, the R value does need to be an absolute reference. So let's put the $signs around that. I use the F4 key. And now when I copy it down, my answers will be the same way that they were before. However, the new system is much more flexible. If I change the mileage in R1 to say 70,000, note that it now includes an extra model for 2020. So there must have been something greater than 60,000 but less than 70,000. If I were to change it to 30,000, note that there are no early model cars, 16, 17, 18, that meet that criteria, but there are a few from 2019, 2020. Okay, let's take one more look at this with the averageifs formula. Equals averageifs. Now, in the averageifs formula, the first criteria is a little different. It's the column that you want averaged. So in this case, it's the E column. So after that, you put in range criteria sets, as many as you'd like. So in other words, it's telling me no matter what happens, we're going to average what's in this column E, or asking price. But the criteria as to which ones to average together, I'm going to click on CC, is equal to, whoop, it's right in the way there, so I'm going to jump up there. CC equals L9. So in other words, average if it's a 2016. But also, if the mileage, comma, don't need the comma there, is less than or equal to, and I'm just going to type it in, R1 because I know that's where it is, and I'm going to make that an absolute reference. Now, when I do that, you're going to see something funny happens. I get this error. Evaluation function averageifs cause a divide by 0 error. And that's because there are 0 instances of that. So you really can't do an average if you don't have any values to average. Okay, let me copy down the formula though, and you'll see that as soon as we get to a year in which there are actual values, we wind up getting an average. Let me take these for a second. I'm gonna take all 4 of them actually, or all 5 of them, and make them currency. So now you can see in 2019, those cars that were 2019s and also under 30,000 miles averaged a little over 26,000 miles. If I put this back up to 70,000 miles, you can see those errors go away and it produces a nice average value for me. And look, it differs from the average if. Remember, this one was based only on year, only on the fact that, and the syntax was a little different. For the old average if, it was the criteria, it was the range that you were checking, the criteria, and then the range you were averaging. For the new average ifs, that range that you're averaging is the first thing that goes in because it's then followed by pairs of information. Range, criteria, range criteria, range criteria, etc., all separated by columns. Okay, I know that was a lot. You can play around with it, try to make it work. It's common to have some errors when your formulas get more complex. It's really just a process of persisting and working through.